Alright, hello everybody. Today is September the 18th and we are heading towards fall equinox. That means that the sun is still in Virgo and it's making an opposition to Neptune, which is in the end of Pisces. And Mercury has also just recently stationed direct. And these things going on in the sign of Virgo, including the opposition to Neptune, is basically what I'm focusing on today. Now, there's a couple things that I have in mind to get into this video, and I'm thinking that with this video, like the last video I did like this, I gave some personal anecdotes of my time in Australia and comparing it to Burning Man and talking about Neptune in terms of the archetype of getting stuck in the mud and all this kind of stuff. And I have to admit that I was kind of in a silly mood that day and I wasn't taking the video that seriously, and that there's a certain kind of sense of humor involved. But I think in this day there's a certain different kind of mood or different kind of approach I'd like to take, and you know, one of the things that has been on my mind is like whether or not, like how much of my own personal life I'm including, how much of my own personal life I'm making visible, and my own there's this kind of this whole question around basically transparency and making visible. And I've been reading a lot of books by this guy Byung, and last night I finished reading a book called Capitalism and the Death Drive. I know it's a very cheery title, right? And it was kind of funny because in the end of the book there's a couple of interviews with him, and the interviewers are kind of like, you don't seem like a very happy person. And Byung is saying, like, you know, I'm not aiming for happiness. That's not but he is a kind of a very broody kind of character from the sound of it, right? So there is this, I have to realize that for some reason I'm enjoying these books that are written, like there's a certain kind of, I think what put people off by things which are like too intellectual is that they just consider these are a bunch of broody, upset people who just basically see problems everywhere and are, you know, upset about it, right? Rather than a feel-good sort of spiritual thing, right? And that maybe this doesn't, you know, go very well with New Age spirituality. But he does write a lot of stuff about mysticism and contemplation, and it ties quite, he's really into Heidegger and all the stuff about being, which I find actually works quite well with it. And the main point is that, where am I going with this? There was in that interview, you know, I was reading Byung because I was, for a while, like I used to be really involved in the radical mental health scene and doing this stuff around spiritual emergence, and there's a lot of this stuff about like coming out of the closet, that this is something that people are ashamed about. It's kind of a taboo thing that people don't want to be out in the open about it. And then I was reading this thing about Byung, this interview, and he was talking about welfare recipients in Germany, about how people on welfare basically are treated like, they're basically made to be really ashamed of themselves, and that they basically self-censor and hide themselves to the point where they don't have any political power, because they basically internalize this whole message that they are despicable, shameful people and that they don't deserve to have a voice, right? And then I'm starting to realize that a lot of what I'm doing, I've kind of mixed up, because I was kind of like looking at this thing of transparency and using it to justify my own inclination to basically hide myself away and censor myself, when it's kind of like what he was criticizing is mainly the, you know, it's like there's this whole thing about like living an Instagrammable life. And like I haven't been on Instagram for a while, and I've kind of stopped using it, and I've kind of like turning away from social media and stuff like that. And you know, there's this whole thing where I stopped making astrology videos for a while. I took a break, I went on hiatus, and sometimes I wonder if I should do this again, right? My last video that I made, I've managed to get myself in really the gutter of the algorithm. Like, that I realized, well, I don't want to spend too much on this, but I'm not really promoting myself very much, right? But there's this kind of thing where my videos are not just, if I just make a video and upload it, and I don't like, you know, try to self-promote and post links in different groups, like, they're not getting any clicks at all. Like, so, but maybe that gives me some room to express myself, right? Or that if I'm in this, locked into this sort of what Byung Chul calls the panopticon, where nobody watches you and leaves, because basically instead of talking about entrepreneurial success, you're talking about things which are more difficult that people don't want to pay attention to or whatever, right? But the thing is that like living an Instagrammable life is like going out to concerts and shows, or going traveling on vacation and showing all these little pictures of the things that like you like and you're happy and you're proud of and you feel good about, and basically creating a kind of a collage of all these good happy things. And there's no, but Byung Chul Han basically criticized there's no room for like negativity in this, and there's no room. It's kind of, you just kind of get this addictive culture where people are just looking for the next hit of like, something that makes me feel accepted, or somebody telling me I'm doing a good job, or like approval and validation and all this kind of stuff, right? But with this in mind, like, the whole thing about this situation and building like an image of yourself online, or like getting what we value as being successful versus what we're ashamed about, that like a lot of the thing for me is of like the impulse to hide away, or the impulse to not present myself, basically comes from this thing of being like there's this, what I've been struggling with anyways the whole time I've been making astrology blogs this year or last couple years, is moving back in with my family, living with my mom. And that the thing is, I think in some way it may be there's this whole thing about being like me being like, I'm going to turn 37 this year, so I'm like pretty old, and my mom is around 70 years old, and I basically came to this decision a while back that like, if I have any problems living with my family that are really that serious, that I have done things like family therapy before, and that's probably the most appropriate way to deal with it. And I wouldn't want somebody else who had a problem with me to be like, well, instead of dealing with this directly with the person, I'm just going to make like a video blog and complain about the people that I'm living with, whether this is family or roommates or anything. It's kind of like underhanded to do that kind of stuff. But there are, like, a lot of my experience is that there's a certain thing about being a millennial adult and then living with your boomer parent, and there's I don't want to just like make a video where I'm complaining about the situation, but like I'll give you one example of just to illustrate my point, is that like I distinctively remember as a young child growing up, and you have these people as adults who are raising you and are kind of telling you about like, I'm just like basic things like the do's and don'ts, or the yes and or whatever of how to live in life and whatever. And there's certain things like, if you have electrical appliances, like I remember always my dad would say, now Dan, when you unplug an electrical appliance, make sure you go over to the wall and grab the thing that's plugged in and pull it out, because if you just yank the cord, what you're doing is that eventually tears the wire apart and breaks the cord, right? And so I just remember like having all these things like growing up, and all these like how you're supposed to do things, and I like literally like having lunch at the kitchen table, and my mom is there with a vacuum cleaner, and she just like the cord is plugged on into the wall on the other side of the kitchen, and she will just yank the cord out, and it's just like, well, I didn't want to get up, and it's this kind of thing is like, oh, okay, like and you try to like you go when I was a child and you guys were adults, this is the kind of thing you told me not to do. Do you remember this? But how dare you tell me this? You're just my son. You're just a little kid. You doesn't never mind that you're 37 years old. You were by the time I was your age. Like I'm the age that if I was my mom, I would have a little kid, and I would be telling the little kid, don't pull the fucking, don't pull the cord like that. You have to go to. But there's this whole thing where it's like, so it's just like the psychology of being an adult and being the age I am and not having children, and yet having this whole kind of puer senex thing with aging adults, where adults become like, as adults get old, they become like children, and you're in a position where you as a child have to parent your adult, but it's extremely awkward because the adult still has this identity that they're the one basically calling the shots. They're the one whose job it is to make sure you don't do anything wrong. They're the one whose job it is to basically tell you what to do and what not to do. And if you try to flip that on them, they really don't like it, right? So basically, like, it's become the situation where you have to be completely kind of like subservient, or just like submit to the situation. Because I mean, the other thing too is, like, there's this whole thing, what I'm trying to say about being ashamed or feeling like you being guilty about the situation, is that, I'm somebody who is basically like, this is what I'm talking about. Neptune is like being dependent, right? It's like that there's this whole thing about also like privilege, basically, because in this situation, like, I'm not working a day job like normal people do, and I'm not that worried about my survival. But if, like, let's say, like, I'm dealing with, I've got a mental health diagnosis, I've got a lot of this is like, what makes people, a lot of it is not really so much like when somebody is disabled, it's like, it's not in terms of like they can't go in and like functionally do the job or perform different tasks. It's like their ability to get along with people, right? And this is the whole thing, is that, like, if you start like fighting with the people that you live with, regardless of whether this is your family or whether this is a roommate or something like that, your whole privilege of being like, oh, I'm somebody who has benefits and I have a house and I've got, once my mother dies, I'll be receiving inheritance. There's this sort of threat that, like, you have to behave in a certain way, or else, you don't know what, if you really misbehave, you might just end up on the street like a homeless person, right? Or that if you really are put in a situation where it's survival, like, am I a privileged bourgeoisie white guy? No, I mean, if I had to like go and get a job, well, I'd be probably working just like the most bottom of the line, like whatever, working class job. Because what am I gonna do? Like, I'm immediately just gonna be a scientist or something like this. It doesn't, So this is the kind of thing of like being, this whole thing too about basically therapy or whatever as well, about like this kind of implication in therapy. I don't know. Like, I'm kind of thinking about, so some of these videos that I'm making, it may make more sense maybe to just talk to a therapist rather than, if I've got all these problems or whatever, I don't want to put it into a video, right? But from my initial trying to find a therapist, the therapist was basically talking about it in terms of, like, you decide what you want, because it's not the therapist's job to make these decisions for you, and then the therapist is there to basically just get you to do the thing that you're avoiding, or that you're procrastinating, or that you're not or to make some big change in your life, right? And so in this situation, it's like, well, I feel embarrassed, or I feel ashamed, or I don't feel like this is something I can put on my Instagram profile, I don't feel like I can, like, but there's this, I feel like there's this underlying sense of it, that of like, if you just appreciate and be grateful for the situation you have, you can see that it's actually not that bad. It's a there could be a lot worse family situations, there could be a lot worse living situations to be in, and all this kind of stuff. But this drive, or this could be the drive to individuate, right, or to be independent or something like that, right? But this whole thing about this is that, like, if you look at it in a very, like, if you take in consideration, okay, I'm talking a lot about Neptune, right, with the whole parental problems, or feeling like a child who has to parent the parent who's now a child, but you are literally an adult, but you're being treated like a child who has to be a parent to your, this is like the Neptunian murky water mix-up feeling, right, that is kind of not so comfortable about this transit. What I was thinking, though, is with, like, the Mercury stationing direct side of it, is like this whole thing about with, like, the therapy and figuring out what you want, and basically making a decision, right? And one of the things, I can't remember which, like a while ago I was doing I Ching, and I got, it's like one of those moments when you're doing an I Ching hexagram and it really comes through clearly for you, right? And what kind of came through clearly with this I Ching hexagram was the message of like making a decision of what it is, what course of action you want to take, and then basically committing yourself to that action. And then once you kind of accept that this is the path that you are on, then you don't have to, there's this whole thing of like, is there something else that I could be doing, right? And that you to be like, there could be a lot of other options or a lot of things that I could be doing, but I'm consciously deciding to do this specific thing. And so by doing that, it's not a matter of like, I really resent my mother and my family for like holding me hostage here when I'd really rather be doing something else. It's like to see that like I mean, look at it like this way, in terms of like if it's about being independent or something like that, or being individuated, basically what it means is you're either like renting a place as a part of a non-familial roommate arrangement, but then in that situation I'm basically living with a bunch of strangers or people I'm going to have to meet because I don't know anybody who I'd be doing this with right now, right? But like, you basically have to adapt yourself to a group of people or their lifestyle or whatever, or find basically a way to live as a bachelor, which is basically, it's not that there's anything wrong with living on your own, but it's in this economic climate and the cost of housing and stuff like that, it's really like not, I'd have to really change my lifestyle around in terms of what kind of work I was doing, what kind of money I was making to be able to afford like some fancy condo bachelor pad or something. Or either that, or it's like you go to like these really awful, like, you go to the slums and you're living with drug addicts and homeless people who don't have anywhere else to go, and you're in like the shittiest possible circumstances, which that's not very good either, right? So it's like, the kind of thing about this is like that, if you don't, I think you get the sense that like the whole system is set up that like if I'm living with my mother and if I'm paying rent and I'm helping to pay the bills, this is a house that my family owns, and so if I'm doing things like helping to reduce, let's say there's yard work that needs to be done, like there's blackberry bushes that need to be taken care of, or there's repairs to be done in the house, the more that I can do this work myself, it basically, there's money that would be spent hiring other people to do this work that basically I am just absorbing. So it's like, instead of making money, there's my family as a kind of economic unit, which you could imagine as being, rather than just having three atomized, isolated individuals without very much economic power, together we have a house and we can keep the lights on, we can keep the power running, and we can take care of the thing. And it's like the house is worth more money than I realistically would be in a position to make myself, right? And I have to admit, maybe I'm just a privileged white guy who is going to inherit his parents' house. But to me, in this situation, like, we could work together and sell the house and have a bunch of money, and that's more money, and that gives me more money and more ability to do things than anything else that I could possibly do. Or else I could basically, and there's also this kind of question of, what the actual will of my family is. Do my family want to have me around, or do my family not like me and they want they want to disown me and they want me to go? It's more in the situation that I think that if I talk to my mother about different like goals and life plans and stuff like that, and it's like, if I sort of have an aspiration to, let's say, well, I have to get a career together, right? Because they're not gonna take people in another country as an immigration if you are just like a lazy person who's on the dole, right? You need to have a career. But my whole thing is like, so if I have a career, that would like open up all these doors for me, like in the sense that I wouldn't have to live with my mother, I wouldn't have to live in this specific town. I could go do all these other things. But if I've actually were to talk to my mother about what she explicitly would not want me to move away, and not because of, I think for very, this is maybe something I should, I don't know if this is something you should talk about in therapy or something like that, but like there's actually a will for me to be here, to help my mother out with the house, to help my mother out with the pets, to do these things, and it's like I would basically have to go against the will of somebody who wants me to be here, who wants to help take care of me, and I would basically have to alienate myself from that, and maybe even risk being disowned, right? Like, it could be like, if you really don't like living here, fine, you don't get any of the inheritance, you don't get any of it. And so this is like, I think there's this kind of, but I don't want, like, it feels really awful if like there's this whole thing where this situation where you really don't have any care or respect for your family at all, you're just doing it for the money, right? But like, if something, I don't know. I don't know if I'm just talking too much or talking too fast about this, but this is like, but what I'm trying to say though is that like, instead, like, to me the whole idea of therapy is basically implied that like, so obviously you don't like things about the situation. You don't like being stuck at your hometown. You don't like being stuck living with your family. You don't like feeling like a child when you are literally an adult. So what can you do about this? Well, what you can do about this, I mean, I don't have to go to a therapist to fill the blanks. It's literally get a job. It's literally try to become an atomized individual who is a productive economic force for society, who's not just leeching off the system, who's not just leeching off your mother, because we're programmed to basically be ashamed of this and basically feel like we can't talk about this on the internet, that we have to harbor this as some dark secret, that I'm unworthy as a man because I'm, for one thing, living with my family, for another thing, living on benefits, and so it's like, it's obvious, like, I don't know what the point of seeing a therapist is, because the therapist is basically just saying, yeah, you're exactly right. It's a totally shameful and disrespectful thing to do, and and you just have to get your ass together and fall in line and do what everybody else does, right? And to that, I would say, like, what if my decision is actually to stay here, living with my family, to help look after the house, to help look after the pets, to keep up a good relationship with my mother and my sister, and to the point where everybody here is happy and comfortable, and then when it comes time that my mom passes away, that I inherit the house and we can sell the house, and and la-di-da, and everything's great. Like, what if that is actually just makes sense as the most, like, because what else am I going to do? Like, am I going to go and I'm going to try to become a hot shot person who makes a lot of money, have a condo in like Vancouver downtown, so I can like live the crazy Playboy bachelor life or something like that, because that is basically how I've been raised by consumer society to think that that's what I'm supposed to want, right? That, like, what if I just make the decision that, like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stay here. I'm going to live with my family. I'm going to try to get along, and I'm going to do all this stuff, right? And then, rather than, and not treat it like it. And I am thinking that there are things that I could do, like, whether or not I want to, like, travel or go on vacation and stuff like that. One of the problems is that I'm on a medication right now where I have to physically go in and sit in a clinic once every 2 months and have this medication put into me. And so it's like, if I wanted to travel, I could only, I would have to come back to Canada. Like, I can't travel for more than 2 months or something, right? But I have, this is like, I am fairly privileged. I'm privileged. I'm a white guy, and I've got money, and I don't have a job, and I could just go and travel and enjoy myself, and I could make that my Instagram profile, right? All these travel pictures, or going to concerts, having a fun time, stuff like this, right? And like, I could live, like, live it up, live your life, right? But I don't know. I'm there's something about the whole, I don't know about, this is getting too distracted, but the whole attitude of traveling, that it's like getting, I don't know. There's something about the whole tourist lifestyle, the whole tourist culture, that not so into, right? And that like when I did go traveling, the kinds of things that I did, like I wasn't just going on a guided tour or doing the tourist circuit. I was doing things that were kind of off the beaten track, right? And so I don't know. I'm kind of just on this big long ramble with this, and I don't know if this is the best. I don't know. Maybe I should slow down. Okay, well, this is my best shot at trying to approach the material in this in this video, and just for the record, like one of the reasons why I'm doing this is that if it goes with the astrology in the sense that my midheaven and IC are in Virgo and Pisces, and my mother's a Virgo, and the 10th house, 4th house is often people talk about being the father and the mother or the home and the family and all this kind of stuff, and that the Neptune, I think, is a big one to do with these kinds of, what do you want to call it? I don't think codependency is really the right word, because I think codependency is like more like when you're in a relationship with somebody. And like my whole thing about this is not because I've lived on my own and I've traveled and I've done things like that, and I don't have this idea that I'm like completely incompetent, that I really need to live dependent on my family. But it's like by living this lifestyle where I'm living with my family, it makes me feel like I'm incompetent, right? In the sense that like if I'm like living an independent life where it's like there's more, all the basic day-to-day responsibilities are on me and I'm not part of this family unit, then it's like I can say, well, I can get by, like with the pandemic, I can live in a different city away from my family and survive. And it's like I don't feel like I'm like completely like somebody who needs to have professional help to get by day to day, to be looked after, or I don't need my I don't need my mummy to come tuck me in at night and treat me like a little baby. I could if I could afford it, I would live as a bachelor maybe or something like this. But it's like the actual, it makes more sense rather than paying money to a landlord to pay money to your own family to put your own efforts into this thing to this, and I'm going to me it just sort of just makes logical, rational sense. But I mean, I guess there's something else that I was been thinking of with the whole Virgo, Pisces, Neptune kind of thing is like, I have to admit that during this thing I've been feeling very critical. I think there's something about Virgo, which is like, Virgo is good for thinking very critically about things, but in a way that could even be too critical, or like that might be even self-defeating. It's so critical. But I mean, one of the things that I'm thinking of is like I've been opening up this interest around philosophy and reading literature and stuff like that. But in a Virgo, with this sort of like being decisive and making decisive decisions, because I have this whole thing that like maybe if I just went to college or university, like I don't, I think I've basically decided that if my main interest is like literature and philosophy, I'm better off just doing book clubs online or being parts of reading groups or taking online courses and just following, learning from people that I like to learn from and just doing what's already available to me. And then if I listen to, apparently the philosophy departments in university and colleges aren't very good, and they often, unless you become faculty, staff, or something like that, it's probably not going to lead to a job or anything like that, right? And I think with the whole Mercury in Virgo, I can kind of like, it's kind of like this sort of like cold, hard, sober look at the situation and saying that, yeah, it's probably not really worth it to do that. And so, but like my desire for going to college and university is more like to have, like instead of living at my mom's house, to basically have an excuse to like go off like a young person would and live the independent life on a university campus or in student housing, or to basically to live. But in terms of what I like, there's so much stuff online now that I could just do it all online. Or I could go to university while living at my parents' house. But it's not, for me, it's not really so much about university as in, wanting to somehow advance out of this situation that I'm in. And like, this other thing too is that like, I could work towards like not living at my parents' house. I could move out, but then the whole, it's like, what am I going to do? Like move to some slummy thing in Surrey, or like do this whole thing where you live in the like, it's actually maybe not, it's maybe less stressful just to live with my family than live to a place where you're like, you're not sure if you're gonna run into like some like around each corner, like there's going to be some homeless person throwing bricks at you, or like or people overdosing on the street. Like, is that really what I want to be around? And this is the whole thing about trying to, what is success or whatever in a situation like this, right? I don't know. Like, I don't know. There's maybe like again, maybe this is just a messy astrology video where I'm talking too much about my personal stuff, but like I said, in my last, I've basically destroyed my algorithm coverage where nobody is watching my videos. So I can basically, I guess I have room to express myself and feel comfortable because nobody watches this shit anyways, right? So, it doesn't really matter, does it, right? I don't know, or does it? You tell me. But this is basically some of my thoughts going into this Sun-Neptune opposition and the Mercury Direct in Virgo. Okay, thanks for watching. Whoops.